What if I told you that in 1960, 7 Plymouth Valiants with economy car engines humiliated every single V8 muscle car at Daytona? Not 1 or 2 flukes, 7, in a row. The top 7 finishing positions, all taken by cars nobody thought could race. This is the story of how one radical intake manifold design turned Chrysler's most boring engine into a giant killer. Picture this. It's January 31st, 1960, Daytona International Speedway. The NASCAR compact car race is about to begin, and the smart money is on the Falcon V8s, maybe the Corvair Flat-Sixes. Nobody's paying attention to the little Plymouth Valiants lined up with their slanted inline-6 engines. These are economy cars, grocery getters, the kind of car your aunt drove to church. The engines lean 30 degrees to the right just to fit under the hood. They make 101 horsepower stock. In racing terms, they're sitting ducks. But Chrysler had a secret weapon, a modification so effective, so devastating to the competition, that after this single race, NASCAR would essentially ban it from future events. This wasn't some multi-million-dollar factory program with unlimited resources. This was a small team of engineers who looked at an engine everyone else had written off and said, "We can make this thing fly." To understand why this victory was so shocking, we need to understand what the Slant-Six was. Introduced with the 1960 Plymouth Valiant, this engine was Chrysler's answer to a simple question. How do you make a reliable, economical inline-6 that fits in a compact car? Their solution was brilliantly simple. Tilt the entire engine 30 degrees to the right. This slant gave them room for a lower hood line, better weight distribution, and easier access to spark plugs and accessories. The base 170 cubic inch version used a cast iron block with a bore of 3.4 inches and a stroke of 3.125 inches. Compression ratio was a modest 8.2.1. The valve train was about as basic as it gets. Solid lifters, stamped steel rocker arms, and a camshaft designed for smoothness, not speed. The carburetor? A single-barrel carter that could barely fog a mirror. Maximum power came at 4,400 RPM, and even then, you were only getting 101 horsepower. Torque peaked at 155 pound-feet at 2,400 RPM. These weren't performance numbers, they were survival numbers. But here's what everyone missed. The Slant-Six had bones, good bones. The block was over-engineered with 7 main bearings instead of the 4 you'd find in most sixes. The forged steel crankshaft was practically indestructible. The connecting rods were forged steel, too, not the cast pieces you'd find in competitor engines. This wasn't built for speed. It was built to last forever. And that over-engineering would become the foundation for something extraordinary. In late 1959, NASCAR announced a new compact car racing class for 1960. The rules were simple: stock-bodied compact cars with engines under 200 cubic inches. Suddenly, every manufacturer had a chance to prove their economy car was better than the competition. Ford had their new Falcon with an optional 144 cubic inch 6. Chevrolet brought the Corvair with its air-cooled Flat-Six making 80 horsepower, 95 with the optional version. Studebaker had the Lark, AMC had the Rambler, everyone wanted in. Chrysler saw opportunity, not to sell more Valiants, though that would be nice, but to prove their engineering philosophy. While Ford and Chevy were cutting costs everywhere they could in the compact car market, Chrysler had built the Valiant like a scaled-down full-size car. Now they had a chance to prove it. The development of what would become the Hyper-Pak started in a small building at Chrysler's Highland Park engineering facility. The team was led by Tom Hoover, who would later become famous for developing the 426 Hemi. But in 1959, he was just another engineer trying to make a grocery getter engine competitive on a racetrack. The budget was laughable compared to what Ford and Chevy were spending. They had to be clever. The first thing Hoover's team realized was that the Slant-Six's biggest weakness was breathing. That single-barrel carburetor and restrictive intake manifold were choking the engine. The exhaust manifold was even worse, designed for manufacturing efficiency, not flow. The camshaft was spec'd for idle quality and low-end torque, not high RPM power. But remember those overbuilt internals? They could handle a lot more than 101 horsepower. Here's where it gets interesting. Instead of starting from scratch, the team decided to work within NASCAR's rules to create a dealer option package that could theoretically be ordered by any customer. This wasn't really meant for the street. It was a racing package disguised as an option code, but it had to bolt onto a stock engine without any machine work. No boring, no stroking, no porting, just bolt-on parts. The centerpiece of the Hyper-Pak was the intake manifold, and this wasn't just any intake manifold, this was a work of art. Cast in aluminum to save weight, it featured individual runners that were absurdly long for the era. We're talking about runners that curved up and over the valve cover, stretching nearly 15 inches from the carburetor to the intake valves. In 1960, most people thought short runners were better for performance. Long runners were for torque, not horsepower. But Hoover understood something about intake tuning that wouldn't become common knowledge for another decade. Those long runners created a ramming effect at specific RPM ranges. As each intake valve closed, it sent a pressure wave back up the runner. Time it right, and that pressure wave bounces back just as the valve opens again, cramming extra air into the cylinder. It's free supercharging, no moving parts required. The Hyper-Pak's runners were tuned for 4,500 to 5,500 RPM, exactly where a racing engine would spend most of its time. Sitting on top of this magnificent manifold was a Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetor. Not just any 4-barrel, this was a 500 CFM unit, absolutely massive for a 170 cubic inch engine. To put that in perspective, the stock single-barrel flowed maybe 150 CFM. This carburetor could flow enough air for an engine twice this size. It was overkill, and that was the point. The exhaust side got similar treatment. The stock manifold was replaced with a tubular steel header featuring equal-length primary tubes that merged into a collector. Each primary was 1.625 inches in diameter, sized specifically for the engine's displacement and RPM range. The tubes were routed to maintain equal length, critical for exhaust scavenging. When one cylinder's exhaust pulse exits, it creates a low-pressure zone that helps pull exhaust from the next cylinder in the firing order. Get the lengths right, and you've got another form of free power. But breathing improvements mean nothing if the valve timing isn't aggressive enough to take advantage. The Hyper-Pak camshaft was a solid lifter unit with 252 degrees of duration on the intake side, 260 on the exhaust. Lift was increased to 395 inches intake, 405 inches exhaust. Compare that to the stock cam's 222 degrees of duration and .375 inches of lift. This new cam kept the valves open longer and lifted them higher, moving more air at high RPM. To handle the extra stress, the valve springs were upgraded to dual units with an installed pressure of 85 pounds, up from the stock 65 pounds. The springs could handle 6,000 RPM without float. The stock springs were done by 4,800. Solid lifters eliminated the pump-up issues that hydraulic lifters would have at high RPM. The rocker arms were still stamped steel, but they were shot-peened for strength. Here's what made this package brilliant. Everything bolted right on. No machine work to the block, no modifications to the head beyond maybe shimming the springs. A decent mechanic could install the whole thing in a Saturday afternoon. The only internal change was the camshaft, which required pulling the timing cover and oil pan. Not fun, but not impossible. But wait, there's more. Chrysler also developed a high-compression version. By milling the head .080 inches and using a special head gasket, compression jumped from 8.21 to 10.5.1. On 104-octane racing fuel, this was safe. The power increase was substantial, about 15 horsepower just from compression. Remember, in racing, every horsepower counts. The complete Hyper-Pak package transformed the Slant-Six. Where the stock engine made 101 horsepower at 4,400 RPM, the Hyper-Pak version made 148 horsepower at 5,200 RPM. That's a 47% increase. Torque jumped from 155 to 163 pound-feet, and it peaked 1,000 RPM higher. But these were conservative ratings. On a dyno with proper tuning, these engines were making closer to 160 horsepower. Some racers claimed even more. Think about that for a second. This was a 170 cubic inch economy car engine making nearly 1 horsepower per cubic inch in 1960, without any internal modifications beyond a camshaft. Ford's 289 V8, which wouldn't come out until 1963, made 271 horsepower in its highest performance version. That's 0.94 horsepower per cubic inch. The Hyper-Pak Slant-Six was more efficient than a V8 that wouldn't exist for 3 more years. The first public test came at Daytona on January 31, 1960. This wasn't the famous Daytona 500. That was for full-size cars. This was the compact car race, 10 laps, 25 miles total. Short enough that fuel economy didn't matter, long enough that reliability did. 7 Valiants showed up with Hyper-Paks, along with a field of Falcons, Corvairs, Larks, and Ramblers. The Valiants were prepared by different teams. Ray Nichols Engineering handled some, while others were prepped by independent racers who'd gotten their hands on the Hyper-Pak parts. NASCAR Tech Inspection passed them all. Everything was technically a factory option, even if you couldn't actually walk into a dealer and order it. When the green flag dropped, something extraordinary happened. The Valiants didn't just compete, they dominated. Marvin Panch led the charge, but it wasn't a single heroic victory, it was a massacre. Valiants took 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th place. The first non-Valiant was a Falcon in 8th. The Corvairs? They were lapped. Multiple times, the racing world was stunned. These were economy cars with 6-cylinder engines, and they'd just embarrassed everything else on track. The automotive press couldn't believe it. Hot Rod magazine called it the upset of the year. Stock Car Racing magazine ran a technical analysis trying to figure out how Chrysler had done it. The answer was simple: superior engineering and that incredible intake manifold. But here's the kicker. After Daytona, interest in the Hyper-Pak exploded. Racers wanted it, but so did regular enthusiasts who saw what it could do. Chrysler had planned this as a limited production racing package, maybe a few hundred sets. Suddenly, they were getting orders for thousands. The problem? That beautiful long-runner intake manifold was expensive to produce, really expensive. The casting was complex, with cores that had to be precisely positioned to create those long, curved runners. The reject rate was high. The carburetor and header were off-the-shelf racing parts, but that manifold was unique. Chrysler was losing money on every kit they sold, even at $400, about $4,000 in today's money. For reference, a complete Valiant cost $1,900 new. NASCAR didn't help. After seeing the Valiants dominate, they quickly changed the rules. The compact car class was restructured to favor V8s. The Hyper-Pak was essentially legislated out of competition. Chrysler had proven their point, but the racing opportunity was gone. By mid-1960, they'd stopped promoting the package. By 1961, it was officially discontinued. Total production? Nobody knows for sure. Chrysler's records are incomplete. Best estimates put it between 1,500 and 2,000 kits, though some say it could be as low as 1,000. Many were bought by racers and used up in competition. Others went to enthusiasts who installed them, drove them hard, and eventually threw them away when they moved on to V8s. Today, a complete, original Hyper-Pak setup can sell for $15,000 or more. Just the intake manifold alone goes for $5,000 if you can find one. But the Hyper-Pak's influence went far beyond those original kits. It proved that the Slant-Six could be a performance engine. Aftermarket companies started developing their own performance parts. Clifford Performance, Offenhauser, and others created intake manifolds inspired by the Hyper-Pak's long-runner design. None quite matched the original, but they kept the spirit alive. In drag racing, the Hyper-Pak became legendary in the F-Stock and G-Stock classes. These were categories for small displacement engines with limited modifications. A well-tuned Hyper-Pak Valiant could run the quarter mile in the mid-15-second range at about 85 mph. That might not sound impressive today, but in 1960, a stock Corvette with a 283 V8 only ran about a second quicker. The technology pioneered in the Hyper-Pak influenced engine development across the industry. That long-runner tuning effect? It became standard practice in performance intake design. By the 1980s, every manufacturer was using tuned-length runners. Today's variable-length intake manifolds are a direct descendant of what Chrysler figured out in 1959. They just add electronic controls to optimize the runner length for different RPM ranges. Modern engine builders still study the Hyper-Pak. The principle is timeless. Match your intake runner length to your intended RPM range, size your carburetor or throttle body for maximum velocity without restriction, and tune your camshaft to take advantage of the improved breathing. It's the foundation of naturally aspirated performance, and Chrysler nailed it on their first try. So, what was actually going wrong with everyone else's approach? They were thinking about airflow all wrong. Ford and Chevy were obsessed with big ports and short runners because that's what worked on V8s. But a small displacement six-cylinder engine doesn't need massive ports, it needs velocity. Those long Hyper-Pak runners created tremendous velocity, which improved cylinder filling far more than any big port head ever could. The exhaust header was equally clever. By maintaining equal primary lengths, it created a scavenging effect that helped pull exhaust gases out of the cylinders. This reduced pumping losses and allowed the fresh intake charge to fill the cylinder more completely. The collector was sized to maintain velocity without creating excessive back pressure. Every dimension was calculated, not guessed. Let's talk about that camshaft for a moment. In 1960, most performance cams were designed by grinding them bigger until the engine stopped making power. Then, backing off slightly. The Hyper-Pak cam was different. It was designed specifically to work with the intake and exhaust tuning. The valve events were timed to maximize the ramming effect from the intake and the scavenging from the exhaust. This system's approach was revolutionary. The high compression option pushed things even further. At 10.51, the Hyper-Pak was running more compression than many racing V8s. This was only possible because of the Slant-Six's combustion chamber design. The wedge-shaped chamber promoted good flame propagation, reducing the tendency to detonate. The long intake runners also helped by cooling the intake charge through latent heat absorption from the fuel. But the real genius was making it all bolt-on. Chrysler could have designed a special racing head, high-compression pistons, a forged crank. They didn't. They proved that with clever engineering, you could extract tremendous performance from stock components. This philosophy would influence hot rodding for decades. Why spend thousands on machine work when bolt-on parts could get you 90% of the way there? Hyper-Pak also changed how people thought about six-cylinder engines. Before 1960, if you wanted to go fast, you bought a V8, period. The Hyper-Pak proved that a well-engineered six could embarrass those V8s. It started a six-cylinder performance movement that continues today. Every turbo four-cylinder and six-cylinder performance car owes something to what Chrysler proved at Daytona. Looking at surviving Hyper-Pak engines today, the engineering quality is remarkable. The intake manifold casting is a work of art, with smooth transitions and carefully shaped runners. The header tubes are mandrel bent for consistent diameter. Every component was designed to work in harmony. This wasn't parts bin engineering. This was a holistic approach to performance. The racers who ran Hyper-Paks developed their own tricks. They found that advancing the cam timing 4 degrees improved mid-range power. Running slightly rich, about 12:5.1 air-fuel ratio, kept the exhaust valves cool during extended high RPM operation. The dual-valve springs needed checking every few races, as they'd gradually lose tension. These engines were reliable, but they required attention. Some racers went beyond the factory package. They ported the heads, focusing on the bowl area just above the valve seats. They experimented with different carburetors, finding that a 600 CFM Holley worked even better than the Carter AFB. They tried different exhaust collectors, different gear ratios, different ignition timing curves. The Hyper-Pak was a starting point, not an ending. But even in stock form, the Hyper-Pak was remarkable. It turned a 101 horsepower economy engine into a 148 horsepower racing engine with nothing but bolt-on parts. It proved that American engineers could think outside the box, that bigger wasn't always better, that clever engineering could beat brute force. It showed that Chrysler's engineers understood airflow dynamics better than anyone else in Detroit. The lasting legacy of the Hyper-Pak goes beyond the Slant-Six. It proved that factory-backed performance packages could be profitable, if not directly, then in marketing value. It paved the way for packages like the Z28, the Boss 302, the Trans Am. Every special edition performance package owes something to what Chrysler started with the Hyper-Pak. Today, reproducing a Hyper-Pak is challenging, but not impossible. Clifford Performance makes a similar long-runner intake, though it's not an exact copy. Headers are available from several sources. The camshaft can be reground to the original specifications. But finding an original Hyper-Pak intake manifold? That's the holy grail for Slant-Six enthusiasts. They surface occasionally, usually in an estate sale or a forgotten warehouse, and they're snapped up immediately. Modern technology could improve on the Hyper-Pak design. Computational fluid dynamics could optimize the runner shape. Port fuel injection could improve distribution. Variable valve timing could broaden the power band. But there's something pure about the original. Analog engineering at its finest. Every dimension calculated with slide rules and proven on dynos. The Hyper-Pak story is really a story about engineering philosophy. While everyone else was adding cubic inches and cylinders, Chrysler made their existing engine breathe. While others relied on brute force, Chrysler used science. While others built dedicated race engines, Chrysler created a bolt-on kit that any racer could install. It was democratic performance, achievable performance, intelligent performance. That day at Daytona in 1960 wasn't just a race victory. It was validation of an engineering approach that prioritized efficiency over excess, sophistication over size, intelligence over brute force. 7 Valiants crossing the finish line ahead of everything else wasn't luck. It was physics properly applied. The Hyper-Pak didn't just make the Slant-Six fast. It proved that with the right engineering, anything is possible. What makes this story even more remarkable is what it meant for the underdog. Every racer who couldn't afford a V8, every enthusiast who had to make do with a 6-cylinder, suddenly had hope. If Chrysler could make a Slant-Six embarrass V8s, maybe they could too. The Hyper-Pak democratized performance in a way that no V8 ever could. It said you didn't need money, you needed knowledge. In the end, the Hyper-Pak was too successful for its own good. It embarrassed the competition so thoroughly that they changed the rules to stop it. It proved its point so decisively that there was nowhere left to go. But for one brief moment in 1960, a humble economy car engine with a clever intake manifold ruled the racing world. And that manifold, that beautiful, expensive, impossibly effective intake manifold, became the stuff of legend. The next time you see a modern car, With variable length intake runners, direct injection precisely timed to the valve events, or headers designed with computational fluid dynamics, remember where it started. Remember 7 Valiants at Daytona. Remember the Hyper-Pak. Remember that sometimes the best engineering isn't about having unlimited resources, it's about understanding the problem better than everyone else. What's the most impressive factory performance package you've ever seen? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of racing's greatest upsets, hit that subscribe button for more stories of engineering brilliance that changed the automotive world.